If the world kicks you in the head, that's one thing. But when you don't do what you're supposed to do, I have no sympathy or empathy for you. So why would I feel anything for that? That was his fault. He did that to himself.
It's finally clear why Demond Wilson didn't attend Redd Foxx's funeral. The TV father and son who made America laugh had a bond that went deeper than anyone imagined. But it all fell apart in the most heartbreaking way.
I'll tell you something. I haven't spoken to Redd in 5 years. I said, but if you got, they kept hounding me. I said, okay, I'll get in touch with him. I said, but I got to tell you, this is not going to be a day at the beach. Fox is not who you might think he's going to be.
For 5 years, they were inseparable. If you wanted to talk to one, you had to go through the other. They were a team that broke barriers and made television history. But then, everything changed.
Redd would file, but he never, ever paid. And they called him down to the IRS offices, and he performed, and not in a nice, kind way.
When Redd Foxx died of a heart attack in 1991, the cast of The Royal Family rushed to the hospital. His longtime friend and co-star was nowhere to be found. The man who played his TV son for 6 years didn't even know Redd had died until he returned from Africa. This is the untold story of what really destroyed their friendship and why Demond Wilson made a decision that haunts people to this day. So, let's get into it. John Elroy Sanford was born in St. Louis, Missouri on December 9, 1922. But it was the streets of Chicago that would shape him into the man who would become Redd Foxx. When his father abandoned the family, young John moved to Chicago with his mother and found himself surviving in a world that demanded quick wit and even quicker thinking. By his teenage years, John had earned the nickname Chicago Red because of his reddish hair and light skin. The south side of Chicago in the 1930s was a tough place for any black teenager, but John discovered he had a gift that would serve him for the rest of his life. He could make people laugh. His humor was raw, unfiltered, and often shocking, but it was authentic in a way that resonated with people who had lived hard lives. Chicago Redd's early hustle involved more than just comedy. Like many young black men of his era, he found himself involved in various street activities to survive. There are persistent rumors, though never fully verified, that during this period he worked alongside a young man who would later become Malcolm X. Both were trying to make it in a world that offered few legitimate opportunities to black men.
But I think the most prominent person was Brother Malcolm X, who I was associated with for 15 years, as 15, 20 years maybe as friends. We were friends. In New York, we were kids together.
The transformation from Chicago Redd to Redd Foxx happened gradually. The Redd came naturally from his nickname, while Fox was chosen as a tribute to Chicago Cubs player Jimmy Foxx, whose skill and determination John admired. More importantly, the name change represented his evolution from street hustler to professional entertainer. By the 1940s, Redd had discovered the Chitlin Circuit, a network of black theaters and clubs where performers could work without the restrictions imposed by white venues. This circuit was rough, demanding, and often dangerous, but it was also where black entertainers could develop their authentic voices without censoring themselves for white audiences. Redd's comedy during this period was unlike anything being performed in mainstream venues. His material was sexually explicit, racially charged, and brutally honest about the black experience in America.
I married a Korean. Pretty, maybe you saw her. I married the enemy. Because I'm an American war veteran. I think if you can't beat them good, fuck them.
The party records that Redd began making in the 1950s would cement his reputation as the king of the party records. These recordings, sold primarily in black communities, featured material so explicit that they couldn't be played on radio. But they found an eager audience among black listeners who rarely heard their real experiences reflected in mainstream entertainment. What many people didn't realize was that behind the raunchy humor was a sharp intelligence and a deep understanding of racial dynamics in America. Redd's comedy wasn't just about getting laughs. It was about speaking truths that other performers wouldn't dare touch. He was describing the reality of Black life in America with an honesty that was both hilarious and heartbreaking.
I want to mention about the fact that I'm doing good now, but I can think back how poor my family was in 1932.
By the 1960s, Redd had moved to Las Vegas and was performing in mainstream clubs alongside white comedians. But he never lost the edge that had made him famous on the Chitlin circuit. His Las Vegas audiences, both black and white, were getting something they had never experienced before: completely unfiltered black comedy that didn't apologize for itself. The success in Las Vegas brought Redd to the attention of Hollywood, where he began appearing in films like Cotton Comes to Harlem. But despite his growing fame, Redd remained essentially the same person who had hustled on the south side of Chicago. He was generous to a fault, loyal to his friends, and absolutely committed to his own vision of what comedy should be. When Norman Lear approached Redd about adapting the British sitcom Steptoe and Son for American television, many people thought it was impossible. How could this X-rated comedian succeed on network television? What they didn't understand was that Redd had been preparing for this moment his entire life. In 1971, when Norman Lear was casting his adaptation of Steptoe and Son, he knew finding the right chemistry between father and son would make or break the show. Redd Foxx had already been cast as Fred Sanford, but finding the perfect Lamont would prove to be more challenging than anyone anticipated.
Esther, you call in Esther? Now everybody in town don't know about this.
Grady Demond Wilson had taken a winding path to that audition room. Born in Valdosta, Georgia in 1946, Demond had grown up in New York City, studying dance and appearing in Broadway productions from childhood. But it was his military service in Vietnam that truly shaped the man who would become Lamont Sanford. When Wilson walked into the audition for Sanford and Son, neither he nor Redd Foxx could have predicted what would happen next. The chemistry was immediate and undeniable. Redd, who was 48 at the time, saw something of himself in the 25-year-old Wilson. Both had come from backgrounds that demanded strength and humor to survive, and both understood the unique pressures facing black men in America.
That Grip said that he's your real father. Grip? Yeah, me and all else says a lie.
From their first scene together, it was clear that this wasn't just acting. It was a genuine connection between two people who understood each other on a profound level. Redd's Fred Sanford was cantankerous, scheming, and often infuriating, but Wilson's Lamont brought out the humanity in the character. Lamont was the voice of reason, the dreamer who still believed in possibilities, and the son who loved his difficult father despite everything. The success of Sanford and Son, when it premiered on January 14, 1972, was immediate and overwhelming. The show broke new ground by presenting a black family that was neither stereotypical nor sanitized. Fred and Lamont Sanford were complex, fully realized characters dealing with real problems while maintaining their dignity and humor. For Wilson, the success was both thrilling and overwhelming. He had gone from relative obscurity to being part of one of the most popular shows on television. But more importantly, he had found a creative partnership that challenged and inspired him. Working with Redd taught him about comedy timing, character development, and the responsibility that came with representing Black Americans on television. By 1974, Sanford and Son had become one of the most successful shows on television, consistently ranking in the top 10 and making NBC millions of dollars. But behind the scenes, tensions were building that would test the bond between Redd Foxx and Demond Wilson in ways neither of them expected. The trouble started with money, but it went much deeper than simple salary disputes. Redd had been making $19,000 per episode when the show started, which seemed like good money at the time. But as the show's popularity exploded and NBC's profits soared, Redd began to feel exploited. He was watching white actors on similar shows receive ownership stakes and profit-sharing deals while he remained essentially a hired employee on his own hit show.
The real reason I left Sanford Son, well, I've never said this before, and I know it's going to cause a lot of trouble, but the real reason I left Sanford Son because those lousy bastards over there, they took and gave me no kind of money, no.
What made the situation more painful was that Redd knew his worth. He had spent decades perfecting his craft, surviving in a business that had tried to marginalize him, and had finally achieved mainstream success. Now he was being told that despite being the star and driving force behind one of television's biggest hits, he couldn't have the same ownership opportunities given to white performers. The breaking point came during the 1973-74 season when Redd decided he couldn't accept the situation any longer. He demanded a 25% ownership stake in the series and a raise to $25,000 per episode to match what Carol O'Connor was earning on All in the Family. When NBC and Tandem Productions refused, Redd made a decision that shocked everyone. He walked off the set. For Demond Wilson, Redd's walkout was devastating on multiple levels. Professionally, he suddenly found himself carrying a show that had been built around the chemistry between two people. But the professional challenge was nothing compared to the personal betrayal Wilson felt. For 3 years, he and Redd had consulted each other on everything. They had been a team, making decisions together and protecting each other's interests. Now, Wilson was learning about the most important decision of Redd's career from a newscaster in the hallway at NBC. Wilson later explained that his hurt wasn't about Redd's decision to fight for better treatment, but about the fact that their partnership had been broken without warning. He emphasized that despite everything, the love between them remained, but the trust had been fundamentally damaged.
I'll tell you something. I haven't spoken to Redd in 5 years. I said, but if they kept hounding me. I said, okay, I'll get in touch with him. I said, but I got to tell you, this is not going to be a day at the beach. Fox is not who you might think he's going to be.
The 6 episodes without Redd Foxx gave Wilson a chance to prove himself as a leading man, and he rose to the challenge. But the show felt incomplete without the dynamic that had made it special. Audiences missed the interplay between Fred and Lamont, and ratings began to suffer. Behind the scenes, NBC and Tandem Productions were facing a $10 million lawsuit, as they claimed Redd had breached his contract. The legal battle was bitter and public, with accusations flying from both sides. Redd's representatives claimed he was suffering from health problems due to the stress of the show, while producers accused him of making unreasonable demands. The dispute was finally resolved in June 1974, with Redd receiving his $25,000 per episode raise and a percentage of the producer's net profits. It seemed like a victory, and Redd returned to the show the following season. But something fundamental had changed in his relationship with Wilson. When they reunited on set, both men tried to pretend everything was normal. They fell back into their professional rhythms, and the show regained its footing with audiences. But Wilson later revealed that he saw Redd differently after the walkout, not as the mentor and father figure he had trusted completely, but as someone who could make life-changing decisions without consulting the people closest to him. The damage to their relationship wasn't immediately obvious to audiences or even to most of the cast and crew, but the foundation of trust that had made their partnership so special had been cracked in a way that would never fully heal. The return of Redd Foxx to Sanford and Son in 1974 brought temporary stability to the show, but beneath the surface, darker forces were beginning to take control of the comedy legend's life. The pressures of fame, the stress of his legal battles, and personal demons that had been lurking for years were converging in ways that would ultimately destroy everything he had built. Redd's cocaine use, which had started as recreational experimentation in the entertainment industry, was escalating into something much more serious.
Redd would file, but he never, ever paid. And they called him down to the IRS offices, and he performed, and not in a nice, kind way.
For Demond Wilson, watching his mentor's transformation was heartbreaking. The man who had been a father figure and creative partner was becoming someone Wilson barely recognized. The cocaine was affecting Redd's judgment, his relationships, and his ability to maintain the professional standards that had made him a legend. But the drug use was only part of a larger pattern of self-destructive behavior that seemed to accelerate as Redd's fame grew. His spending habits, which had always been lavish, became completely divorced from financial reality. He purchased exotic cars, expensive jewelry, and maintained a lifestyle that was impressive but ultimately unsustainable.
If the world kicks you in the head, that's one thing. But when you don't do what you're supposed to do, I have no sympathy or empathy for you at all.
Most painfully for Wilson, the collaborative relationship that had defined their partnership was deteriorating. Redd was making decisions without consulting him, breaking the pattern of mutual respect and shared decision-making that had made their chemistry so special. The man who had once insisted that producers go through both of them for any major decisions was now acting unilaterally. By 1976, both men were growing tired of the show that had made them famous. The creative challenges that had once energized them were becoming routine, and the personal tensions were making the work environment increasingly difficult. They had achieved everything they had dreamed of when they first met, but the cost was proving higher than either had anticipated. The end was coming, though neither of them fully realized it yet. The bond that had seemed unbreakable was being tested by forces that neither success nor their genuine affection for each other could overcome. In 1977, after 6 successful seasons, Sanford and Son came to an end, not because of declining ratings or network pressure, but because Redd Foxx made a decision that would haunt both him and Demon Wilson for the rest of their lives. A BC had offered Redd a lucrative deal to host a variety show called the Redd Foxx Comedy Hour, and he decided to leave the show that had made him a household name. Once again, Wilson learned about this life-changing decision not from his partner, but from outside sources. The pattern that had begun with Redd's 1974 walkout was repeating itself, but this time the consequences would be permanent. When Redd quit Sanford and Son, he essentially ended both their careers on the show without consulting the man who had been his creative partner for 6 years. NBC tried to continue the show with Wilson as the sole lead, offering him a raise to carry on as Lamont Sanford without his television father. But Wilson, feeling betrayed and emotionally exhausted, refused. He had his own opportunities, including a $1 million contract with CBS for a new show called Baby I'm Back. But more importantly, he couldn't imagine doing Sanford without the chemistry that had made it special. Redd's variety show proved to be a spectacular failure, lasting less than a year. The format that had worked so well for other entertainers couldn't contain Redd's particular brand of comedy, and without the grounding influence of playing Fred Sanford, his performances felt scattered and unfocused. The man who had walked away from a guaranteed hit was suddenly struggling to find his place in the entertainment industry.
So why would I feel anything for that? That was his fault. He did that to himself.
The years that followed were difficult for both men, but they took very different paths. Wilson found moderate success in other television projects while gradually shifting his focus toward his spiritual life, eventually becoming an ordained Pentecostal minister. Redd, meanwhile, was entering a downward spiral that would define his final years. In 1980, Redd attempted to revive his most famous character with a new show called Sanford, but Wilson refused to participate. The show, which featured some of the original cast members but lacked the central chemistry that had made the original special, lasted only 1 season. The failure was a painful reminder of what Redd had given up. The last meeting between Redd and Demon occurred in 1983, when Wilson was approached about participating in a Redd Foxx 50th anniversary special. Wilson later described the encounter as awkward and tense, with Redd being less than welcoming. Despite the uncomfortable atmosphere, They managed a reconciliation of sorts with an emotional farewell that included tears and embraces. It was the last time they would see each other. By the late 1980s, Redd's financial situation had become desperate. The IRS had seized his Las Vegas home, his cars, and virtually everything he owned to pay back taxes totaling nearly $1 million. The man who had once made millions was reduced to taking whatever work he could find, including a role in Eddie Murphy's Harlem Nights. On October 11, 1991, while rehearsing for his comeback attempt, The Royal Family, Redd suffered a massive heart attack on the Paramount Studios soundstage. The cast and crew initially thought he was performing one of Fred Sanford's famous fake heart attacks, but this time it was tragically real. When news of Redd's death reached Demond Wilson, he was in Africa on a ministry trip. By the time he returned to the United States, the funeral arrangements had already been made. Wilson later explained that everyone was upset with him for not showing up to the funeral, but he revealed that he had a personal policy against attending funerals. The absence that people noticed most at Redd Foxx's funeral wasn't that of a co-star or colleague. It was that of the man who had been his television son for 6 years and his real-life surrogate son for even longer. That's it for this video, folks. Bye.